Okay. Should we start? So, hello everyone. I hope you're fine. I am doing just a second. Thank you. I'm sorry for this. So, I am Juliane Silva, co-chair of the Critical Internationalization Studies Network, together with my dear friend Santiago Castiel Gutierrez. This is the second part of the event thought by us, Roxana, Juliana, and I, to invite authors who contributed reflections to the special issue, which we entitled Inhabiting the Otherwise in International Academia, Critiques, Complexities, Struggles, and Reexistences, that was published December last year in the Journal of Comparative and International Higher Education. So I would like to welcome everyone who has accepted this invitation to participate in this dialogue with us, especially our guests, Anne, Athena, Gabriela, and Nayara. I would also like to express our appreciation to the network for providing us the space to broaden this conversation. Our main idea here today is to reflect on the lessons we learned when writing the papers, especially now that we are considering experiences in bodies speaking and inhabiting the epistemic global south, right? Differently from the first event. I am speaking from Mariana, Minas Gerais, in southern Brazil, together with my dear friends, my lovely and loving friends, Juliana and Rox, whom I invite to present themselves and share screen with me.
Rox, would you like to go? So, hello everyone, good afternoon. I don't know if it's good afternoon for you, good afternoon for me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm Juliana. I'm one of the friends who say that it's a great pleasure to have this space to talk to you after the papers and the work that we had through the special issue. We have learned so much and thought so much about decoloniality and so many things through the experience of having contact with you. So thank you so much for accepting the invitation and for being here with us. I'm also in Brazil, in a city called Curitiba, in the south of the country, okay?
Hello, everyone. I am Roxana. I am speaking to you all from the city of Arica in the border with Peru at the north of Chile. I have been co-inspiring with Juliana and Juliane since a couple of years ago, reflecting deeply about what it means to inhabit academia and trying to disrupt colonial legacies and acknowledging our contradictions. And it's a space that is always interesting to explore because of the many emotions and I think the realizations that we have that we could see where the mechanisms of inequalities get reproduced. And then we can also notice how profound the roots are. I'm going to pause here because we have the space to broaden the conversation and to speak about the process of what it meant to engage in this in articles that intentionally aimed to interrupt, to question, to critically think about internationalization of higher education. And I have the mission as well to who is a professor in the University of Ushuaia of International Studies in Cuenca, Ecuador. I do know that is another borderland with Peru. ANCAR's research agenda focuses on critical internationalization of higher education, climate change, and global migration, and epistemic uncertainties of sustainable development. Thank you so much, Anne, for being here with us. I'm noticing a message that is popping up in the on the chat, I see that the editor of the Journal of Comparative International Higher Education is here. Thank you, Rosalind, and is at the same time showing where this special issue was published. Thank you so much for that information, Rosalind. Athena is our second speaker. Athena is a professor from the Language Center, Masaryk University in Czech Republic. Her research focuses on literary and oral tradition of Central and Southern America. Thank you, Athena, for making the time and to be here with us. Another speaker is Gabriela Chumbi from University of Ushuaia International Study in the Cuenca, Ecuador. They were part of the same research paper. They will talk to you more about what they did, but was one of the most, one of those papers that engage critically in challenging the ways what we think about internationalization in higher education. Her research focuses on migration, cross-cultural communication, and international cooperation. Gabriela, it's a real pleasure that you are with us today. And Nayara Mandarino, our and literature at the at the Federal University of Paraná in Brazil. She's part of the research group of language policies and the internationalization of higher education. GPLS, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I understand that she's also part of the another research group, Identity and Reading, and the National Literacy Project. Thank you so much, Nayara, for making the time to be here. After several emails exchange, is really special to be in presence of all of you. Having said that, we have three questions for you that we are gonna engage during this session, and later on we will have some space to discuss with our audience that some of you I can recognize from other gatherings. So just gonna read these questions to all of you. First question, writing is a mainstream validated social practice through which research is disseminated in academia. Considering our goal of inhabiting international academia otherwise, how have you experienced writing in this space? How was your experience of writing and publishing your manuscript in this special issue? Can writing be reconceptualized as an embodied process associated with resistance? This is one question, but it's a tricky question because it has three sub-questions that really invite us to get deep in how this process showed up for all of you. The second question is how to resist and re-exist ourselves, and what has decoloniality invited you to move differently in the world. I do know that we will start with the first question in any order that you consider that feels right to you. I don't know who would like to start. Anyone? Anne, go ahead.
Sure. So first, thank you to everybody who's there, either as editors or guests, as writers. It's great to be able to be communicating with you from Ecuador. What I'd like to do, and maybe it will take, I hope, 5 or 7 minutes. I hope that's okay, Rox, to tell you that in a few moments, we have some student quotes that we want to share so that you have some sense of how our experience is in response to those prompts or questions. So we want to also share a little bit more with you about the project. So this is a little bit way around answering, but we want you to know a little bit about us. Us is Athena in the Czech Republic, Gabriela here in Ecuador, and we have other partners that contributed to the article that you published, They are in the Dominican Republic and in London, in the UK. So how our project got started that we wrote about was actually a very interesting Brazilian inspiration, because there was a very interesting investigation done about student and teacher perceptions of learning online. Students in international studies here in Ecuador in 2020, as they were returning to presential classes. And what we found was that, in fact, students had a very a significant statistical difference in their preference for social media sites, for also learning academic stuff, compared to the views or perceptions of their teachers, which was that Zoom was the only place and social media was for something else. So significant difference that we listened to as a group and as individuals in testimonials, since it was a mixed method study. So that happened 2020. At the same time, into Ecuador, hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans were arriving through COVID with the dire distress that they were going through for multiple reasons. And Ecuador greeted with some graciousness and with some trepidation and hermeneutic injustice in some cases about who they were and what they were going to do and whether they were not good. And so these two currencies, the questionnaire to the students that we work with and all of the Venezuelans arriving, contributed to our thinking about epistemic injustice. And Fricke, who is a British sociologist, her book, her 2007 noting of epistemic injustice, drew us, projected us to trying to do some empirical work with students. Now, this is where Athena is going to come in. In fact, 4 universities participated in the project, which is ongoing. It is now 8 universities. And we got together through a very organic way. And so this is sort of contrapuntal to more administrative top-down COIL type projects. Ours was very organic. And at the University of Aswai, there was a person, a woman who is now retired, called Narcisa Ulauri, who was very important in our coming together. So Narcisa and I were working, listening again to indigenous and rural groups of people, mostly women, about the lack of clean water. That was one project we were doing. Athena, please step in. You were working with Athena on the medicinal forest in Amazonia. Can you say just a little bit about that?
Of course. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and thank you for inviting us. Yes, actually, as Anne has mentioned, Narcisa was the person who has put us together because our universities, Masaryk University, actually you can see the picture on the screen here in Brno. Brno is close to Vienna, so in Central Europe. We had, and we still have, a very interesting project with the University de Azuay and with other 5 universities, which is focused on the indigenous people from the Amazon. Questions that our project, this different project, focuses on is precisely the questions of identity, the questions that are somehow linked to the fact that very many indigenous languages and cultures are in a risk of extinction, because of the globalization and those pressures that put them in a very delicate situation. And us, we are from the language center. We were interested mainly in the languages, in their cultures, in their oral traditions. And in this particular moment, we were working on the storytelling element. And here it put us together with Anne, because we were speaking about migrants who are in a very similar situation regarding their identity and regarding their experience due to the epistemic injustice. And perhaps we can say that we've started working on preparing a project which was called epistemic injustice first, but then with the time, with the evolution of the project, we put the prefix in into brackets, so it would be epistemic justice. And the last part is actually we have like several stages that are focusing on very different aspects of this process, but the epistemic injustice like concept is very present there. So just to mention the part of Narcisa, which was very, very important for us, it was precisely the first very early stage, which is focused on the collaboration where the questions of identity and collective memory were very, very important. So I'm passing you back the word, Anne.
Thanks, Athena. So if I may, I'll just quickly go on and mention two other very important women in the Dominican Republic who were also collaborating with Narcisa about the touristic employment opportunities for Haitians. And as you know, Haiti is the other half of the island that Dominican Republic is on. So that's our initial 4 universities who in fact were the contributors to the article that we're talking about. Since then, we've grown to 8. And now I want to mention that we now include 2 universities in the Ukraine, one directly in the area under war, and the other in the west of Ukraine, and also Turkey. And their university is on the border with Afghanistan. So we have a cross-border, cross-cultural, north, south, east, west thing going on. So this enabled us to be very to the ontologies and the epistemologies of each other. And we wanted to reflect that in the experiences of students through series of Zooms. And I think you will have read about that in the article. So how do we keep this together, given that we are north, south, east, west? I should also mention one other important person who's been contrapuntal in this project. He stands astride continents because he is, well, he's a Brit. He is a well-known person at the University College London, which has students from all over the world, and his area of expertise is Latin American history and politics. Also, we're all from different disciplines, so we value that highly. Cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary, transcultural. I think that's all I wanted to say about our project. Oh, one last piece about institutions. We come from very different institutions as we come from very different social contexts, political contexts, economic contexts. Some of our universities are small, some are large, Some are national oriented, some are international oriented, and some are secular and some are religious, and different religions. So again, we welcome this diversity, and I think one of our biggest shared values is collaborative, trans-cultural reciprocity amongst, for the students and for us. I think I'll stop talk. We could come back with our student quotes and maybe expand more directly on the questions you posed, Rox.
Thank you. And I'm going to invite, I don't know if Gabriela want to add anything to that point.
I think, thank you. And I think that we can go to the questions that you have proposed. And if we are allowed, we want to share the screen so we can show some quotes from our students that I think can help us answer the questions that you have sent us.
I am making you co-host at the moment, so try to share it.
I think we can, right? If you
Yes.
can see my screen.
Yes.
All right, so Anne, maybe you can start with the first ones and I'll go
Sure.
next.
Can you go to the first quote, please, Gabby? Thank you. So this is how we would like to initiate a sort of discussion point around our response to this prompt. The student, and this student was from Ecuador. This is when we were working with 4 universities: Ecuador, Dominican Republic, University College London, and Athena's in Brno. This student wrote that by being able to listen and talk with students from other parts of the world, I was able to understand how many times the situations that we live daily are transferred to other contexts and have similar shareholders. We don't see them in the same way. That is, we think that what happens in our country is the worst, or that in other places they handle these issues better. We suggest in this response that the student is realizing her, I think it was her, epistemic capabilities, about which Sen wrote much, to be able to listen and talk. And a focus for us from the emanation of Fricke is this epistemic skills necessary to be able to even listen to an individual testimony or a group testimony, and then be able to talk with epistemic fluency. And so this is something that we have, we talk with, we collaborate with students. And I should note that in the article that you read in the journal, in fact, there were students' contributions in the writing. So we see them as partners in our ongoing work. And I think you see here that a sort of new awakening, in a way, of being able to hear, to listen without prejudice to others in a dialogue. So that's how we wanted to respond to that first question. Maybe we should go on and just share our other responses, if that's okay with you, Rox. And then
Just maybe if it's possible, I could perhaps give the chance to Nayara to,
yes, of course.
also
Yes.
express and engage in the first question, and then we can come back to those quotes.
Yeah.
What was the process of writing it, and that, please bring back that concept of resistance, right? If that process of writing allow us to engage in that intention.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for inviting me to be here today. I'm very happy to have the chance to talk to you a little bit about this paper that I wrote with Clarissa Jordan, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. When I was thinking about the process of writing this, I was thinking about the points of conflict, the points of negotiation. And one thing that I really thought about was the point of intelligibility. As the statement is suggesting in the beginning of the question, writing is a mainstream validated social practice. And within the university, which is constituted by modernity coloniality, there is a certain set of rules that are somehow rigid, and writing in this environment, trying to think of other ways of being and knowing in the world, is a very strong process of negotiating with those norms, and also negotiating with ourselves. So as I was writing with someone else, there was first the process of negotiating with my co-author, even though we read a lot of the same things. We are both in Brazil. Now we're both in Curitiba, right? In the south of Brazil. And I came from the Northeast, from Sergipe. But we share lots of the same references. So we agreed in several points when it came to the writing process. But then we had to think about the fact that we would be talking to we didn't know who, and there were the norms of the journal, the idea of the idea that we are coming from the same spot, the idea that language is transparent and people can just read and understand what you meant. Somehow I feel like we still hold on a little bit to the hope that people will understand us, right? So there is a strong process of negotiating with that. So we keep thinking, well, I'm questioning things. I am aware that language is not transparent, transparent, is a process of co-construction, of reading and writing. But at the same time, there is a part of us that is kind of like, oh, I really want people to understand what I'm saying here. So I'm expecting that they will have this kind of question, or they will not understand this kind of context or this kind of idea. So it is a first of all, the layer of negotiating with ourselves, the limits between changing the language too far, thinking about who you're talking to, but also bearing in mind that language is not transparent and it is impossible for people to completely understand what we meant, what we were thinking, what we were feeling, right? And then there was also the process of negotiating with the journal itself, and it was totally related to that because they had questions sometimes in relation to things that would kind of force us to think that people could understand us exactly how we were writing. A certain attachment to the control of what people will understand. That is part of us because we are also constituted by modernity, coloniality. And it was frustrating sometimes because we are speaking from Brazil, been questioning some things like how we do methodology, so how we construct research, how we produce knowledge, what we consider as valid, what the journal considers as valid. And we need to negotiate all of those things. And it's a process that can become exhausting sometimes, because there is the feeling that we need to be explaining ourselves a lot because, as you probably know, when we're talking about constructing knowledge, we look at things through the eyes of the North as an onto-epistemological concept. So when we try to go away from that, to separate ourselves a little bit from that, we find resistance, right? And now resistance here meaning something different, right? Resistant to it's questioning what is mainstream, right? There are different kinds of resistance, and it's also within us as well. So it is a process of thinking What can I do? What do I need to let go of to make things more simple, or to try to still occupy this space, even though I'm going to meet that resistance? So all of that was part of the process. Now, trying to be very brief here because I end up talking too much sometimes. I would just like to talk about the last point of the question, which is in relation to writing as an embodied process associated with resistance. And I would like to relate that again to the opening sentence of this question. Writing is a mainstream practice, right? So what I keep thinking about a lot when I often hear how writing can be a space of resistance, and I think it is in certain ways, it is still a mainstream colonial side, the erasure of all of those knowledges, ways of being, and telling stories that are not written, they're oral, right? And if some people want to share the stories that they would normally share orally, they have to write, so they have to think of another language, they have to let go of things, and they have to engage in the process of translating their knowledge so that we understand. So what I keep thinking about is that whereas writing is an important space for us to question things and try to do things differently or find exercise our imagination and find possibilities, learn from our mistakes, we also need to make sure that we're opening space for those other ways of sharing, of having conversations, and of knowing. So what I'm saying here is that we also need to make sure that we're opening space for other ways to share knowledge rather than just focusing on writing, and having people let go of a lot of things to fit into that space. So I feel like we also need to try to let go ourselves of our mainstream way of constructing knowledge. And that's basically what I wanted to say in relation to that question.
Thank you, Nayara. And if you agree, we can move on to the second question. And I do know that and Athena and Gabriela have a lot to share, and from the quotes of a student who demonstrate, with the expressions that emerge from the protagonist who
Okay, so this is another one, and maybe Athena, you want to take this one on, and especially following up on Nayara's comments, I was thinking about your current project you're doing in the Czech Republic this summer about multiple languages at the same time. But this actual quote is from a Czech student. Athena, can I pass it to you?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Anne. Actually, I would like to start mentioning one important thing that personally I would like to highlight. I come from a country which has no colonial past. Our students have had very little occasions to meet migrants until 2022, when the war in Ukraine has started. Actually, Czech Republic is very small, 78,000 square kilometers, and the migration before, which was very important in Europe, Germany, Sweden, other countries, it was not touching us. Everything has changed with the Ukrainian war, but as Anne has mentioned, our project for our students, it was a new world, new horizons to discover. And they all our students studied Spanish language, Spanish literature, culture, society, depending on their study programs. So they were acquainted with the history and contemporary situation in different Latin American countries. And speaking with students of their own age was really, really very revealing for them. As we can see here in the quote, I'm quoting, "The atmosphere of the group discussions allowed me to open my heart and speak my mind. The most touching part was the commonality rather than the difference in the views of students from different countries. I found that despite the very different social realities we were exposed to when it came to issues of principles and the morality of global issues such as equality, conflict, and identity, there was a consistent tendency to oppose all forms of discrimination and to encourage ordinary people to speak out for disadvantaged groups, full stop." And that was one of the students from our group. And actually, that's what they always were mentioning anonymously, but also in our asking them for opinion. Just to mention this and to link it with what has Anne mentioned, as I've said, our country is very small, so it has been always dominated in the history, in the past, by other nations, other cultures. So there was a contact with other languages and necessity to speak other languages. Currently in Europe, generally speaking, there is a very, let's say, there is a new approach to consider learning and studying languages, adopting plurilingual and pluricultural approaches. That means to open, and that's actually reflecting what the quote says, to open the hearts so that our minds can speak, so that we can understand the others. And if we speak about migration, if we speak about very specific groups, vulnerable groups, groups of disadvantaged people who are in a very delicate situation. So it's like that. Yeah, and I pass you the word.
So thank you, Athena. I think Gabby wants to speak about a different part of the question about
to answer how we felt about this part doing the project and then writing the paper. And this is from a Ukrainian student who was part of our project. And this student said, after sitting in a cold pipe basement under the civil dormitory without any food, surviving a Russian genocidal permanent bloody bombardment of my beloved home city in brave country, Ukraine, I realized you should not be attached to material possessions. Instead, you should take care of your own physical and mental health first, because this is the only thing that cannot be taken away from you. by anyone. So with this quote, the thing that comes to my mind is, don't, in the articles or in the story that we tell, don't just tell a story, but make it yours. And this is, I think, what embodied process means. In our project, we were talking about migration, and yes, our students interview a lot of migrants in the different countries that are participating, but also we had students who were migrants themselves and who were going through the migration process. So it was, and I think one of the most powerful things that we have in our project and then could write about, was to hear firsthand. You remember that in one part of the project we did an exercise that Athena told us about, that it was this imaginary suitcase, and we said, if you had to move to another country, what would you take with you? Talking about physical and subjective parts of things. And it was very touching and powerful to hear a student saying, I don't have to imagine the situation because I'm living that situation now, and I can tell you what I'm taking with me as I move as a refugee to another country. So that was very powerful and touching for all of us. And I also want to talk about the power of narratives. And it's to hear these single stories and not trying to make them universal or general and say all of them are feeling this in this way, or all of them are living this situation in this with these specific emotions, but to be able to hear one of them or a couple of them express what they're feeling as a single narrative, a single story. And the other thing is to have our students hear those stories firsthand. I was always telling my students, for example, when we talk about the Ukraine and the Russian war, we're always saying we imagine that they must be feeling this way, we imagine that this must be the situation. But now you have the chance not to imagine, but to ask directly. You have students living those things and living in this country, so just go ahead and ask directly. Of course, always being sensitive and respectful, but ask, and they were able to them and to also have very different perspective from what we hear on the news, and we can only imagine what they are going through. So that was the thing. And so it's with this project we were able to live an embodied process and to put it on the paper, that I think we were trying to express it in that way, and we hope that the project is, and the paper is expressing what we meant to express from the beginning. So that's what I have to say about this part.
Okay, thanks, Gabby. Maybe we should close these student quotes now to allow others who may want to make comments. Thanks, Gabby.
Thank you very much for those powerful quotes that give us a lot of materials and signals of how the project look like, and the level of engagement of many different academics and also students in countries that are in a situation of extreme violence. Nayara, may I invite you to share your thoughts concerning the second question, please?
So I was thinking a lot about this question, and the first thing that came to mind in relation to how to resist and re-exist coloniality in academic spaces, especially speaking from the global south, right? And the first thing I thought about is that there is something in us that really wants to find a solution. We have been taught in colonial system So there is a process there of opening space to not to try to find an easy solution to a very complex problem, which is modernity coloniality. So we need to learn to sit with the problem and deal with all of the responses that we have within us to those things, emotional responses inclusively. So the first thing I was thinking is that there is no easy solution. So the process there is a learning process, and we are learning together, and we are also unlearning a lot of things. So I was thinking that we need to be kind with ourselves in the sense that we won't find a perfect solution because we are also constituted by coloniality. But the focus maybe is not on the solution, but on the process of unlearning and learning new things so we can walk together towards some place we don't know yet, but that is different, that is alternative to modernity coloniality. The second thing I was thinking that is related to that is a personal inner work that is required in this process. Um, we have different voices within us, we have different responses, even though we have been taught that there is an identity that is solid and that it means what we are, who we are. We actually are a lot of things. We respond in many different ways to one single topic. And we don't know how to deal with that. We always think that we need to find one position, like, oh, that's how I position myself, or that's what I think about this. We don't know how to make space for complexity. Will be conflicting. So there is a learning process related to opening space to those different responses, and the fact that we are complex people, and we have different responses, right? So what do we do with them? And I feel like when we learn to do that with ourselves, that reflects on how we relate to ideas, to knowledges, to other people. We learn to open up to difference and complexity, which is how the world is, right? So I think those are very important points in the process. And another one that comes with the unlearning process, is that we start questioning how we make sense of the world and how we look at things. I mentioned that in the previous question, we tend to look at things from the eyes of the North, from the modern colonial eyes. Um, so there is a process related to unlearning that, trying to look at things differently, right? So how do we do that? Again, there is no solution. It's a process of learning from our mistakes. But I think it's very crucial when we're thinking about creating knowledge from the global south, from talking to people from the global south, because it's related to the previous question, related to writing being a very mainstream way of sharing knowledge. If we don't let go of the rigid things we hold on to, then it's very difficult to make space for these other possibilities that might come from the global south. So I feel like the resistance is also related to opening up space for that and changing the terms of the conversation. That is changing how we perceive, construct knowledge, and how we
Thank you, Nayara, for that answer. We were reflecting with my colleagues that coloniality of time is crossing all of us. And this session was planned to last for an hour. And I do know, I'm very aware that we have a last question to share, but I don't want to lose the opportunity to hear from you, those that are in the room. Here, there are two papers, there are the authors of two papers that engage with the critique of coloniality in international projects in different ways. We have shared, and Athena and Gabriela share very clear signals of how that process looked like from the voices of protagonists who were the students. So please take the floor, take the mic to raise your questions or your comments or wonderings. Michael, it seems that you want to raise a question. Am I right? Or not? Yes? Yeah? I can help you to unmute if you, there you are.
You can see. I was just thinking, I gave a part of how do you write in a way that does not evoke denial or defense or minimization? Okay, now when I say you, I mean not only how does the global North write in such a way, but how does the global South write in such a way? And does that require you to change your wording so that it becomes less jargonistic for the global North? Because I mean, you know what you mean here, and you're using these words that have intrinsic meaning to you, emotional meaning to you, and so on. But they may not have the same for the North. So, how, I mean, are you minimizing yourself in order to write for the North to help them understand? It gets kind of complicated, but I'm saying that it's almost a political thing. You know, how do you write in such a way that convinces the other to say, "Oh, I understand now"?
Who wants to just share their thoughts with Michael?
Yes, I would love to respond, Michael. May I do that? So I want to mention these two French words, bricolage, and I think our work is doing sort of address that give us insight in how to support students, the next generation, the Gen Zs. How is it going to work for them? So that's what I wanted to say about bricolage. The other part of bricolage is also assemblage, another French word. And we are a very mixed group of transdisciplinary, transcultural teachers and students. And so in a way, we're circumventing or inputting into this north-south. We're sort of doing maybe I don't know, I'm using my hands. So I don't know if that gives you another way to look at it, Michael.
Well, I think it's far easier in some ways as a one-on-one with students, or Zoom on one, whatever it is. It seems to me easier to articulate how one is doing almost in real time and jump over and resolve some of those questions. But in an academic article, my question is, who's the audience and how are you writing for it? And what is the potential level for misunderstanding and for having the reader run behind their shibboleths of denial, defense, and minimization? I'm thinking of writing in academic articles like I did in the journal, Comparative, whatever.
I don't know if we have the time, but I would like to also add to the thinking in relation to that question is a very good question. Thank you, Michael. So I think related to what I was saying before, this unity, this identity, and how we see ourselves, I feel like we engage a lot with our ego. That is, we engage with a version of what we present to other people. We learn to do that. We don't really know how to deal with the other layers of us and how messy they are, let's say. And I feel like when we're talking about the university, this engagement with our ego, it's like so high up that we create resistances. So we create resistances to listening to other people because we are educated to believe that there is right and wrong, there is transparency. So I'm going to say X and someone will understand X. We are educated in relation to all of those things. So when someone doesn't understand, when someone thinks very differently, we kind of question ourselves in the sense of like, oh, then am I wrong? And is this person right? So there is a part of us still very connected to modernity, coloniality, that is going to create a wall, a certain resistance to listening and letting go of what we believe, because that would mean accepting what we believe as something wrong. I don't know if I'm making sense now. So I feel like the engagement of writing differently and talking to people is an engagement of questioning those things and realizing, oh, how am I writing? How does that reflect what I think in relation to language, in relation to the kind of dialogue that I want to have with people? And also, how can I think about those resistances and write in a way that disarms them, or that at least diminishes them a little bit, and is an experiment, because again, we don't have an easy solution. It's a process of unlearning and learning. And I have been really thinking about that in relation to how I'm writing, the research I have been conducting. So I've been changing a lot the language I use to discuss things, and people see it somehow kind of like, oh, that's weird. Why didn't you do it like that? Why didn't you position yourself? Why didn't you state things? Why did you bring questions you didn't answer? Right? So it's weird. People are like, what is happening here? But somehow I feel like those things help them engage because they think about the questions. They don't really look for my answer, and they don't really look at it as like a right answer for that. Right. So I have been trying to rethink those things in relation to writing. So at the invitation, the conversation, and those resistances, they are different, and maybe we'll learn something in the process.
But in the process of face-to-face, you can remove those resistances far easier than you can in an article, because in the article, you'd have to make so many assumptions about what the person reading is getting. And so that takes a bit longer. And I guess I'm wondering, how can one adjust one's writing in order to convince the other, not knowing where the other's coming from, who's reading this? That's a real big problem in my mind. But on the face-to-face side, you can recognize a hiccup, a problem of somebody questioning and not understanding, and begin to focus on that and perhaps more quickly deal with the issue. So that's just the bifurcation I'm sort of raising here, I guess. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry, Michael. Can I jump in? Yeah. Thank you so much for this intriguing conversation, because it sounds the conversations that Roxana, Giuliani, and I had for so many times when we were reading the papers and giving feedback to the papers, because we also had this concern. Are we understanding what the authors want to say? Are we forcing our own decolonial perspectives on what they are saying? And even though that we were talking to academics, like scholars talking to scholars, so we could imagine that we would be understanding each other because we would be there in the same kind of context and sharing ideas, sharing theoretical background. But what I see here in our conversation, two things that call my attention. First, while listening to the authors sharing their perspectives on the experience, how we have this concern with an epistemological shift. We are not just taking for granted anymore what we are reading, and we are not just taking for granted what the participants of our research and our students and our colleagues are saying. We are taking care if we are really listening to the other in how we are interpreting to the other. So this is quite interesting to see that all of this conversation related to decolonial studies and resistance, there is an epistemological and ontological shift. So this is interesting to highlight. And then when we come to your question, Michael, I think I have some starting points that might be different the way that we enter the conversation. So for me, one aspect that comes to my mind is that when I think about global north is speaking to global south, I ask myself, who is global north and who is global south? In a sense that it's not just a geographical dimension, but it's an epistemological dimension. So I might be global south for many ways, in many circumstances, but I am also global north in so many ways. So how do I talk to my students, establish a hierarchical relationship? How do I listen to them? You know, so there is a first starting point if we realize who we are in certain spaces and contexts. A second thing that comes to my mind is that my starting point in language is that we don't understand each other. So I don't take for granted the comprehension. I take for granted the misunderstanding. So my starting point is that we are in different circumstances, we are in different places, so we cannot understand each other so easily. So if we start understanding that I'm not going to understand the other so easily, I might change the way my attitude, and it becomes an ethical encounter with the other. I have to put myself in a position of not understanding. So I have to ask certain questions for me to see how am I embodying the conversation, how am I embodying the situation that allows me to understand or not understand the other, because this is the history with coloniality. For 500 for five centuries, we are not understanding each other. There is this indigenous scholar in Brazil, Ailton Krenak, and he always says that we are in a war. My world is in a war with your world. So we are not understanding each other for so long. So this is the history of humanity and language. So now that we've recognized that, we are starting paying attention, the wording, the language, the conversation, the terms of the conversation, you know. So for me, what I see is our starting point has to be different in a way that we are not going to reach all the audiences at the same way, because we are breaking out with the idea of being universal. We are not being universal. So we have to focus the audience, but we also have to focus on the misunderstanding. This is part of the negotiation, the conflict, the situation. So this is how I see the problem. It's a huge problem that comes with your question. But what I see at least is that we are more conscious about this, all of the circumstances.
Yes, I think the writers from the Global South are not monolithic either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so therein lies the issue of not universal and being specific. And if you're going to publish in the Global South, and you're talking to the people who understand, but if you're talking to the Global North, and you're using different journals to do so, then you have to understand their specific audiences and adjust accordingly, so to speak. Is that what you're?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying if we are going to adjust accordingly so easily. What I'm saying that misunderstanding is going to play a role there, you know, and negotiation is part of the game. And we cannot forget that the reader plays a role as well. Because I, as a scholar from the Global South, in so many ways, when I write, I cannot just adjust to the Global North. The Global North plays a role as a reader as well. The interpretation is also part of the situation, you know, like the conversation doesn't depend just on one side. It's both sides. Like I'm writing, but someone is reading. So we are negotiating interpretation, like two bodies are there, you know? So I don't know if we can adjust so easily, or if we could learn how to accept difference and how to accept our own ignorance in not understanding certain things. So that would be a more decolonial shift exercise in the way I see it.
Yeah, I understand that, and but you know, the issue is one of the issues is who you're communicating with in the global north in order to publish. Could it be that you're communicating to get support for an idea, get support for a grant, get support for this, as opposed to simply educating?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And getting support requires a different kind of writing than simply saying, here's what I think.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems that there's also writing in between where you're looking at requesting people from the North to understand what's happening in the South. And that's another critical way of trying to approach the people in the North, because they're like, hello, what's going on? You know, one of the interesting things I found was when I was looking at definitions of international education, I found that the people in the North defined it differently than people in the South. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And in the South, it was more process and issue driven, rather in the North, more theoretical and blah, 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 blah. And I'm saying, wow, you know, we really need to understand that dynamic to understand what's going on. And that was 75 people who got that message. But I'm just saying that there's more that need to have that kind of message. And so it's not just in writing, but it's in your presentations, in your Zooming and otherwise, to develop a way to present that to the North who doesn't understand what's going on.
Yeah. Oh, I do agree with you. Yes, but it's a mutual responsibility. I can play my part, but I see that you were doing your part at looking at the other and trying to understand what the other is saying, even though he or she comes from a different context from yours. You know, so it's a mutual responsibility.
Yeah, well, the responsibility doesn't happen in a vacuum. The people from the North don't accept the responsibility if they don't talk to you personally and understand that there is a responsibility.
I don't want to interrupt the dialogue, but I want just to make sure I'm seeing some comments in the chat. Gaurav, would you like to speak up to your comment, please?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say that I know we talked about like language and epistemology and English, and also world Englishes is not something that we talk about. So what is the context of world Englishes in whatever context, country, region, culture, generational that you come from? So that is something that we can look, and also global South and North delineate some sort of universalism, and universalism is not something that I subscribe to, because things need to be contextualized in their space, time, and other, locations. But then also the South and North is kind of problematic, because we think aspirationally North is where everything is correct and we should go to this North. So trying to shake that also is like majority minority world. And it's a deliberate shaking up in the sense of like majority world being where most of the people live in the world, and minority world being the spaces that less people stay, which kind of turns the global north and south on the head. So yeah.
Thank you. So question about the perhaps the way how we're speaking, we are homogenizing what global south and global north means. And it's a called attention, right? Raising our attention how we are using these terms. And Juliana gave us a very good explanation that the concept of global north and global south are epistemic and ontological and relational. And it seems that those categories are not fixed, that there are some moments when one institution, one entity may be in a position, in resistant position of global south, and at the same time, in another context, in another relationship, may be representing values of the global north. And if I can say a word as a scholar located in a geographic space that may be seen as a global south, in the periphery of the country, highly centralized as Chile is, I perceive that it's contradictory. Many times I feel like I'm in this peripheral position in a very global south, in a position of resistance, but I also recognize my privileges and the way how the position that I have in my academic career is associated with the possibilities to talk the language of the global north, and in many ways having been shaped by those values. So thank you for that provocation. And with that, I open the floor. If anyone else want to answer to the question of the provocation that Gaurav gave us, keeping in mind also, and I'm really sorry to be having this role. I am the timekeeper today, and I don't know how busy our schedules are. So, but I don't want to leave anybody with their throat. You know, when you have something to say, please do say it. And it seems that you want to take the word. No?
Me?
Yeah?
No, I think you are maybe projecting. But yes,
No, I just saw your mic that was open. No, I didn't want to project.
I think this, yes, the language, global north, global south. Oh, what are we talking about? It's sort of, I mean, as a strange person, a British colonizing nation, a Canadian, a colonized nation, as a long-term Ecuadorian, I have these sort of three personas going on. And actually, I don't believe that identity is fixed. I think certainly Bauman in Liquid Modernity speaks about identity changes in the processes and the places and people we are with. Our identity is in process. So that's good. I think that's very positive. And I'm not sure what else to say that has any meaningful output except this, that we in our project are listening in our limited ways, acknowledging global north, global south, global middle, whatever, to each other, and we're supporting students listening to each other. And I think our focus, and as an older scholar, a boomer, I feel like we're, I think Sharon Stein has mentioned this. What is it that our generations are supporting the 20-year-olds in doing? We have our issues to figure out, but look, they are many. There are many challenges. So that's where I sort of look, is to Generation Z, mostly, as undergraduates, hearing each other without attention deficit to epistemic injustice. So I think that's enough. I don't want to say anymore. Thank you. Thank you for everything, because it's a very, very significant conversation about writing.
Thank you, Anne. Okay. If we are, you perceive that everything has been said, so I have the mission to pass on to my colleague Juliana to give us our final words for our gathering today. Please, you.
Thank you, Rox. I just want to thank you again for the time and for being here. And I am here just considering, I don't know if the guest speakers today want to say something before we leave, just to say, yeah, just to close. Anne has just spoken, but Nayara, Athena, Gabriela, if you wanted to say something just to close our session, would you like?
I would just like to express my gratitude because this is very important. We were speaking about students, but I must say that me as teacher, I appreciate this very, very much because in these liquid times, we need new impulses to get oriented in this lost situation that we are finding ourselves, to get again this fixed place under our knee, under our feet, so that we can understand how to orient not only our students but also ourselves. And if we can do it in this international global settings simultaneously in real time, this is something marvelous. And I would like to express my gratitude that we can share this experience with you. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Athena, for being here and for sharing your story, your experience, not just in the paper, but with us today as well.
Yes, similarly, I would also like to thank you all. Thank the other authors for sharing their process of writing, their work, the hosts for having us, and everybody else who came to join the conversation. It has been very educative. It's very nice to have the chance to discuss with you, so thank you.
Thank you again, Nayara.
And just to end, a couple of words also to thank you all for opening this space for these articles that are very different and have very different ideas. We know that sometimes to publish, we're asked to have something that can be universal, so it's going to be important and considered as worth it as by many people in the world. But we know that to me, universal doesn't exist. Sometimes some things from the north, as we are now thinking north and south, is it correct to call it that way? But from, let's say, the bigger countries, some knowledge has come to us as universal, but then when we read it, we don't see it as universal and we don't understand it, and we think that's not our context and situation, and so that has happened always. So now is the thing, I think the same, sending articles to the other way around, and now the others are facing the same thing of that's not my context, I don't understand what you're saying, I don't know what you're trying to tell me with this. But I think we need this sharing from both sides, and that's what we're trying to do. So I thank you all for opening a space for this kind of articles and this kind of new knowledge and new opinions and ideas. So that's all, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabriela. The special issue would not be possible if we didn't receive the papers, if we didn't receive the contributions of all of you. So it was a very special moment, a lot of work that Roxana, Julie, and I had. We didn't know if it would be something more mainstream or if it would sounded more decolonial or not, because that was the risk that we took. That was an invitation, and we needed to see how people would respond to that. So that was an exercise for us and for the authors. So we really thank you for that. And for this special moment today as well, this is the second meeting that we had with the authors, and it was very important for us to see people. Because when we read people, we don't see the bodies, we don't know so many things, we don't listen to the voices, you know. So there is all of this body language that was so important, and that was a chance also to be here with you today. So thank you so much. I think that is it. Rox and Julie, yes. So the event has been recorded, and you can find it in the platform of the internet. Sorry that I forgot international. Julie, help us.
Critical Internationalization Studies Network.
Yes, it's going to be available there if you wanted to see it again. And the link for the special issue was already shared in the chat. So thank you so much. Is that okay? Can we say
Thank
goodbye?
you. Yes, goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you for your question and comments.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.